We've all heard people jokingly blame their bad behavior on an evil twin at some point. The horror genre actually seems to be obsessed with twins, especially the concept of the good twin battling against the evil one. But has there ever been a movie where both twins turned out to be evil? It's widely believed that twins have an unexplainable connection where they can sense each other's feelings and even communicate telepathically. This can lead people close to them feeling excluded or like they are on the outside of this special dynamic. Well, one set of twin girls from Georgia had such a strong bond that not even their own mother could come close to it. Most kids start to resist their parents' rules and their control as they come into their early teenage years, and these twins were no different. However, the more their mother tried to enforce these rules, the more the girls developed this us versus her mentality. Eventually, their typical teenage defiance evolved into something much worse, and their 34-year-old mother actually started to fear her daughters. Hey guys, I'm Elise. This is 10 to Life. Let's jump right in. Alright guys, so I know I've talked to you guys about this in the past. You might be hearing this for the first time, but you've probably heard me talk about it before. But I am so excited because so many of you guys have been emailing me, DMing me, telling me that you have tried this product and how it has completely changed your life, changed your sleep, changed your mood, everything. And that just makes me so excited because that's literally what happened to me when I started trying this for the first time. And I'm going to talk to you about the details in a second. And I'm just so excited to be able to pass this information along to you guys because I don't gatekeep, and this has been such a game changer for my sleep. And if you know, but that is Beam Dream Sleep Tea. I was first introduced to this several months ago by my husband because his friend, I think, introduced him to it, and I've always had a hard time sleeping. I have tried Ambien, melatonin, valerian root, chanting, meditation, you name it, and I'm somebody who has a hard time falling asleep. I'm also somebody who has a hard time staying asleep. I'll wake up in the middle of the night, whether it's to use the restroom or just because I wake up because I hear a noise and I can never fall back asleep. That has been my life for as long as I can remember. So much so that my husband even actually worked into his wedding vows how I would be awake at 5 a.m. vacuuming the house at one point. So when I tried Beam Dream Tea, it was such a game changer. And I also am not a huge tea drinker all the time, but it tastes like hot chocolate. So it's this perfect little snack and treat right before bed, and then boom, you fall asleep. It is like magic. But I'm so excited because they just dropped their mint chip flavor, and it literally tastes like you're eating a mint chip ice cream cone. It is unbelievable. You have to try it. That is probably one of my new favorites, but I'm also still a staple girl, and sea salt caramel is my jam. But they have so many other flavors too. They have cinnamon cocoa, chocolate peanut butter, white chocolate peppermint, chocolate raspberry, and of course now mint chip is their newest. Now for me, I drink it 30 minutes before I want to be asleep. So when they had reached out and said, hey, we want to partner with you, do you like the product? I was yeah. It's a no-brainer. I want to partner with you. I want to endorse you because I live for this stuff, guys. And they are so amazing because they are going to pass all of those savings that they can on to you. Subscribe and save and get 20% off, plus get an additional 20% off if you use my code 10TOLIFE, and you will get a free frother as well, which is awesome. So that is up to 40% off. And if you do subscribe, you can skip, pause, cancel anytime. There's no problem. There's no fees, nothing like that. Or you can, of course, just buy a one-time thing, see if you like it, then subscribe from there. Trust me, you are going to subscribe because it is going to change your life. So go to shopbeam.com/10tolife YouTube, and I'll also put the link in my description box, and then use my code 10tolife and you will get all of those savings. It is going to help you sleep. Guys, I just get so excited when I get all of your messages for the products that I endorse and the products that I promote on here. And when I hear that you guys love them too, it just makes me so happy. So comment, DM me, email me once you've tried it too, because guys, it is so good. While most of the stories we talk about end up with someone going to prison, this story actually starts in prison with a woman named Linda Whitehead. At 21 years old, Linda became pregnant right before being sent to prison for possession of substances and robbery. Linda gave birth to her now 34-year-old daughter on April 18, 1975. She gave birth while incarcerated, and she named her Jasmiyah Whitehead. Jasmiyah, who ended up going by the nickname Nikki, was placed in the custody of Linda's mother, Della Horton, who at the time was 41 years old and living in Decatur, Georgia. According to Della, Nikki was a rambunctious child who wasn't the easiest to manage, but since her daughter was in prison, she really had no choice but to raise her granddaughter. She wasn't going to let Nikki be put in the foster care system or anything like that, so she did the best that she could with her. Now, Nikki was very smart, but when she got into high school, she started hanging out with a crowd of people who were not the best influences. Unfortunately, like her mother, Nikki got involved in partying and experimenting with some substances. At just 17 years old, Nikki unexpectedly found out that she was pregnant. An unexpected pregnancy can, of course, be stressful for anyone, but even more so for a teenager who is still in high school. You can imagine how overwhelmed Nikki must have been when she found out that she wasn't just pregnant with one baby, but she was actually carrying twins. So Nikki gave birth to two daughters, now both 29 years old, on November 27, 1993. She named the girls Jasmiyah and Tasmiyah. They would eventually go by the nicknames Jazz and Taz. Almost as soon as they were born, Jazz and Taz's father completely split, and he ended up moving to Canada and was never really involved in his daughters' lives at all. So even without their father, Jazz and Taz were said to be incredibly happy little girls. Jazz, Taz, and Nikki continued to live with Della, the grandmother, which proved to be very beneficial for the twins. At such a young age, Nikki wasn't quite ready to settle into full-time parenthood. Her relationship with her daughters was more of that like a big sister than a mother. She was said to be very social and known to be a bit of a partier as well. People who knew her said that Nikki never met a stranger. She was sweet, she was warm and loving, and most of all, she loved her daughters. Nikki wasn't perfect, but she always held a job and would always financially provide for her girls, while Della was the one caring for their day-to-day needs. At nearly 60 years old, taking care of her two great-granddaughters was not easy, but Della was clearly a woman who stepped up to help her family. However, partying wasn't the only thing that she wanted to do, and she had a lot of ambition and goals on eventually creating a better life for her and her two daughters. When Jazz and Taz were about 3 years old, Nikki began working as a hairstylist. Her talent grew her clientele, which made it so that they weren't suffering financially anymore. Della and Nikki kept the girls as busy as possible in activities too, so that there wasn't too much time for them to ever get into trouble. They were straight-A students. They played instruments, tennis, participated in dance class, Girl Scouts, and were really just bright and well-rounded girls. Jazz and Taz were identical twins. They shared the same DNA, and the only way that you could tell them apart was from one beauty mark that Jazz had on her cheek. Nikki would sometimes bring the girls to the salon too, where she was working, and people would always say how sweet they were, how polite they were, and just a joy to be around. They were full of potential and seemed to be thriving while living with Della and Nikki. However, it seemed like all of that changed when Nikki met a 55-year-old man named Robert Head. Nikki and Robert met at a shopping mall after he had decided to approach her and tell her that he thought she was absolutely beautiful, the most stunning woman he had ever seen. The two of them ended up talking and walking around the mall together, and he even bought her an outfit to wear on a date that she had accepted from him. They went out dancing all night together, and Robert said that it was one of the best nights of his entire life. Even though he was nearly 30 years older than Nikki, there was something about the two of them that just clicked, and they were together ever since. Robert drove semi-trucks, but he had a home in the city of Conyers, which was about 30 minutes away from where they lived in Georgia. As a trucker, Robert was gone a lot of time out of the year, but over time, he and Nikki became pretty serious. Robert was established and probably added a sense of security to Nikki and her future. Even though they were in love, Robert understood how difficult it was for a partner to be out of town the majority of the time, and he told Nikki that they could have this sort of open relationship type situation, as long as she didn't bring other men to his home, and that whenever he was home, she would spend all of her time with him. Now, at the time, the girls were only around 7 years old, and their mom would kind of be in and out of their lives up until around the age of 12. Since Robert lived further away, Nikki would spend a lot of time at his house, and he even encouraged her to enroll in fashion school, which was something that she always wanted to do. About 6 years into their relationship, Robert told Nikki he wanted her and the girls to move into his house in Conyers full-time so that they could be a family together. It was great, it was exciting, it was promising, and he and Nikki got engaged, and she knew that this would be a great step forward for all of them. His home was in a very safe, gated community, and it was on the outskirts of Atlanta, so less crime, and it was going to be a way for Nikki to take back control of her life and her responsibilities as a parent. Plus, Jazz and Taz really loved Robert whenever they got to spend time with him. He would take them for rides in his huge semi, and one of their favorite things was when he would take them to McDonald's in the truck. Now, Robert honestly sounds like an amazing guy. He was clearly madly in love with Nikki, and he loved her daughters as well. So he accepted them as a package deal, and he wanted to help Nikki get her girls full-time so that she could be completely happy, just at peace as a whole, complete family unit. However, Jazz and Taz, who were now around 13 years old, were not as excited about the idea as Nikki was. They liked their life with Della. They liked their school, their friends, and most of all, they liked that they had a lot of freedom. With Della being older, she wasn't really able to keep up with what the girls were doing, and she kind of just would blindly trust them and let them have free reign over everything. She really hadn't noticed until it was too late that the girls' grades had severely fallen behind, and that they were even starting to date older high school boys and started smoking marijuana. When it became obvious that the girls were headed down a potentially destructive path, Nikki desperately wanted to nip it in the bud as quickly as possible so that they didn't make the same mistakes that she did when she was younger. Against their wishes and their whining, Nikki moved the girls from Della's house to Robert's house in the city near Atlanta. She knew they were upset, but she hoped that in time, they'd realize that it was for the better and that they could come together as a family and just be happy. Unfortunately, that would not be how things would go. Instead of getting better as time went on, the girls' anger and resentment toward their mother, Nikki, only grew. They felt like her telling them they couldn't smoke or couldn't see older boys was extremely hypocritical. And they basically just decided that since she had done all of those things, that she wasn't the boss of them and that they could do those things. Plus, they knew that Nikki occasionally smoked marijuana as well, and they didn't respect her authority as a parent at all. So all three of them started arguing more and more, and with Robert rarely ever there, it became 2 against 1. Not long after, one night Nikki went to check on the girls, who were supposed to be sleeping and in bed, only to find that Jazz had snuck out of the house. She called 911, and Jazz was later found staying the night with her boyfriend. Nikki was absolutely horrified at the thought of her 13-year-old daughter becoming pregnant, but the only thing that she could do was take away Jazz's phone in hopes that she wouldn't have any more contact with that boy again. This proved to only make the girls more angry and more hostile. Soon their arguments were escalating, and Nikki actually confided in Robert and some friends that she was becoming scared of the girls. She felt like it was only a matter of time before the girls actually became violent. And she was right. On June 28, 2008, the police department responded to a call at Robert and Nikki's home. The police officer spoke to Nikki, who told her that the girls had violently attacked her. The officer went to speak to the girls in their room and recalled that they spoke very softly and seemed really innocent. She couldn't really understand why Nikki had appeared so fearful when the girls were extremely calm. However, the more she spoke to them, she started to get the feeling that the girls were too calm and acting too sweet, especially given the circumstances that their mother had just reported to the police that had happened. The girls alleged that Nikki was the one being harmful toward them, but for some reason, the officer decided to leave since everything seemed to have cooled down at that point. When the officer left the house, she started feeling like something was a little bit off about that interaction, and she decided to sit outside in her patrol car for a few minutes before leaving to make sure that everything was okay. And her intuition ended up being correct, because only a few minutes later, Nikki called 911 again, stating that both of the girls had jumped her, scratched her, and dragged her across the floor. So when the officer ran back into the residence, the girls told her that they had only done that trying to protect themselves, but Nikki was the only one covered with marks. She was crying, she had scratches all over her neck and chest, all while the girls were eerily calm and unhurt. It was clear to the officer that the girls were the aggressors, and they were arrested and taken to a juvenile detention facility. When the twins had to make their appearance in front of the juvenile judge, he made the ruling that the girls would be placed back in the care of Della. So basically, the girls just solidified to themselves that if they caused enough chaos and even physically attacked their mother, then they would get their way. They'd get what they wanted and go back and live with Della. Now, even after being attacked, Nikki wanted to work it out with her daughters. She wanted to go to family counseling, therapy, anything to help. But the girls were getting their way, for now at least. The judge took into account some of Nikki's concerns, and he ruled that the girls and Nikki would need to attend counseling. However, this proved to not really be helpful because the girls would just put on their sweet and innocent act as they had done with the officer previously. It's clear that Jazz and Taz were struggling internally. To have your father abandon you, and then for your mother to be in and out of your life and clearly not make you a priority until it's convenient, I suppose would cause resentment in anyone. To them, it must have felt like that for all of this time, because Della had been their actual parent, and now Nikki was coming in out of nowhere, wanting to have authority over them, their minds, ruin their lives in their opinion. I mean, it was just very, very messy. Yet we know that that doesn't give children the right to disrespect, and certainly does not give them the right to physically attack a parent or anyone when they don't get their way. But they definitely needed much more extensive therapy before just immediately switching households. Regardless, the lions had been unleashed, so to speak, and once Jazz and Taz returned to Della's, they didn't just jump right back onto the straight and narrow path. In reality, they were ready to get back to doing whatever they wanted, which wouldn't have been too hard to do. Della wasn't getting any younger, and she didn't really have the ability to constantly check up on the girls and definitely not to discipline them. Letting them do whatever they wanted kept the peace for the most part. But the girls at this point were missing so much school that it started to become unignorable. Some family members have said that whenever Nikki would come and try to parent her daughters or talk some sense into them, Della would overstep and would tell the girls, "Don't listen to her." During this time, Nikki ended up reconnecting with her mother, Linda, who was now out of prison and ready to mend their relationship. Nikki learned from Linda that she became estranged from Della due to her overstepping with her parenting as well. However, it kind of seems like they lost sight of the fact that Della was the only one to step in for both of their daughters when they were unable to or didn't want to take care of them. I understand them wanting a say in how their children are raised, absolutely, but they can't really be mad at Della, in my opinion, when she was the one who took care of 3 generations of children. So after about 2 more years of living with their great-grandmother Della, Jazz and Taz had skipped school so much that they ended back up in juvenile court for truancy. On January 5th, 2010, the juvenile court judge decided that due to Della's age, she wasn't able to manage the girls or their behavior anymore, and they would be better off returning into Nikki's care. Jazz and Taz were now 16 years old, and as you can imagine, they were infuriated by this. They were so angry that they threw a giant fit in the courthouse, even causing people to poke their heads out of their offices to see what was going on and see what all the commotion was about. During their tantrum, people overheard Jazz say to Nikki, "If I have to live with you again, I will kill you." However, Nikki was undeterred by this. She was trying to show her girls that she wanted them to be a happy family. She wanted to go to counseling, to work on their issues, and she wanted to make things right. She could understand their resentment because she felt the same way toward her own mother at times, but she wasn't going to give up on trying to do right by them as a parent, even if she hadn't been perfect in the past. Due to the girls being so unruly, to appease them, the judge told the girls that they would just do a 2-week trial period at first to see how that went. Now, this probably wasn't the best idea in hindsight, considering that the girls had already been shown that if they just attack their mom, they won't suffer any real consequences. They will just go back to Della's care. So instead of doing some sort of transitional period, Nikki and the twins were thrown right back in together without resolving any of their issues, and even though she put on a brave face, Nikki was kind of scared. She tried to throw them a welcome home party, but one left the house and the other one wouldn't come out of their room. After that, the hostility, the attitude, and the arguments started up again. Nikki had even gotten a lock for her bedroom door because she was afraid of her daughters coming into her room and attacking her. She must have been suffering some trauma from being physically attacked by her own children in the past, and due to their viciousness during their arguments, Nikki even talked to her friends about wondering if they could have been possessed. Not just scary, not just fearful, but literally possessed. On Tuesday, January 12th, 2010, Jazz and Taz met up with some friends to party. They stayed out until almost 2 a.m., and when they woke up in the morning, they were unsurprisingly not feeling too hot. Nikki walked into their room and told them that they needed to get up for school, but the girls were not budging. Before walking into the kitchen, Nikki told the girls that they were in her house and under her rules, and even if they stayed out late, they were still going to school. Don't care if you're hungover, don't care if you're tired, don't care if you partied, you're still going to school, learn your lesson. Jazz and Taz became very angry by this and got up to confront their mom in the kitchen. Now, according to the girls, Nikki raised a kitchen pot up to them, probably because she felt like they were being aggressive and she wanted to, block and protect herself. They later said that Nikki started waving the pot around, and they were all just screaming at each other in a completely irrational scene of emotions. The twins apparently wrestled the pot away from Nikki, which made her think that they were actually going to hit her with it. So she then grabbed a kitchen knife that was close by. She pointed the knife at the girls and told them to get back, and they all moved into the living room to create some space between each other. However, when Nikki was distracted by something that Taz was saying, Jazz picked up a red vase and smashed it over Nikki's head. Nikki didn't even really realize that she had dropped the knife in that moment because in an attempt to defend herself, she jumped on the closest twin, which was Jazz, and ended up biting her on the chest. Nikki latched on, so Jazz started swinging her fists, hoping that punching her mom would get her to let go of her. However, in the scuffle, Taz apparently grabbed the knife that Nikki had dropped, and she used it to stab her mother. There was only a brief moment of shock because I don't think that anyone anticipated one of their fights to have gone that far. The three of them were in an all-out brawl when Jazz pulled a medal that she had won down off of a shelf and began using it to strangle Nikki. Nikki unexpectedly backhanded Jazz, knocking her off of her feet. Jazz picked up the knife, which had fallen onto the floor at some point, and used it to cut her mother. When they got to the point that all of them were exhausted, they sat back for a moment before Nikki decided to bolt out of the house and make her way to the next door neighbors. It was still early morning, a little before 7:30 in the morning, in fact. So when Nikki started ringing the doorbell over and over, the resident was still asleep. The neighbor ended up waking up from his dog barking, and he stumbled out of the bed, confused at who would be ringing the doorbell that early. He put his dog away first before going to answer the door, but when he got there, the person was gone. Jazz and Taz would later say that Nikki came back to the house and sat on the couch, but I highly doubt that she would do that after just having been attacked and almost killed. Plus, the fact that there were drag marks found later disputed this claim, and we will get to that. So it's more likely that they went to find her and then dragged her back to the house. Now, it's a little unclear what happened right when Nikki got back into the house, but one of the girls must have attacked her again with the knife because she was too weak to fight back against them during what they were going to do next. Jazz and Taz picked Nikki up by her hands and feet and attempted to carry her. They were all very petite, so they ended up actually having to drag her into the bathroom and then put her into the bathtub. Nikki was still awake and conscious, but she was badly beaten, stabbed, and bleeding, and she wasn't able to get up. In fact, at that point, she could barely even move at all. One of the girls turned on the water, and it is such a horrifying thing to visualize, but as they were filling the tub to kill their mother, Nikki was still talking to the girls. They would later say that Nikki was saying things like, "I hate you," and "You're going to jail," and things like that. And the bathwater turned red as it mixed with Nikki's blood. And the girl said that she went under a couple times before she ultimately drowned. Even after just murdering their mother, the girls still argued about what to do next. They weren't stupid, and they knew that they needed to have a solid alibi. So they thought that the best thing to do would be to get ready and to go to school. Even though at that point they were already late and had missed the school bus by a few hours. So I guess they figured that being seen there on camera at some point was better than nothing. Before they left, the girls collected Nikki's purse, phone, that kitchen pot, and the knife, and put them all into plastic bags. They tried to clean up some of the blood stains, soaking up the white carpet with bleach, but this proved to be ineffective, and they really just wanted to get the heck out of there. They walked the short distance to the closest gas station and asked someone for a ride to school. When they got dropped off, they made their way to the counselor's office, got late passes, and headed to class like a normal day. In their frenzied state, the girls, for some reason, assumed that when they got home from school, the cops would already be there investigating the scene, and that their mother would have been taken to a hospital or a morgue. Now, I'm not sure why they thought that, since Robert was out of town and no one knew what they had done, unless they expected that neighbor to call the police. But that neighbor didn't even know who was at the door and what was going on yet. However, when they arrived back home later that afternoon, everything was right where they left it. And I think it was at this point that what they had done actually started to set in. And they later said that they felt horrified, but they honestly probably just felt disgusted by the mess that they had made. After attempting to clean up some more, I'm not sure if they saw the police car pass their house or if the officer just happened to be there when they went outside, but Jazz ran out of their house toward an officer who was handling a completely separate matter in the neighborhood. Jazz seemed to be hysterical as she tried to tell the officer what happened, but all that she could get out was blood, mom, and bath. So the officer went with her back to the house, and he barely got the door opened before he recognized the distinct metallic-y smell of blood. He would later go on to say that the inside was the bloodiest scene that he had ever witnessed. The officer called for backup officers, but he made his way through the house until he came upon the body of Nikki Whitehead, submerged in the bathtub. Both Jazz and Taz were crying, and to the officers, they seemed genuinely upset, shocked, and in a state of disbelief. They were placed in an ambulance to be taken to go get checked out before they would need to talk to the police. In the ambulance and then back at the police station, several people noticed that Taz started rocking back and forth and biting herself on the arm. The adults around them told her not to hurt herself and asked her why she was doing that. Taz told them that it was a habit of self-soothing that she does whenever she gets nervous. And that seemed like a plausible answer and is actually not as uncommon as you might think. When they got into the interrogation room, the girls clung to each other, cried, and were being consoled by detectives who thought that these girls had just tragically walked in on the most horrifying scene imaginable with no idea on who could have done it.
Inside the room, Taz can be seen on surveillance camera rocking back and forth.
Oh, my grandma. Oh, my mama.
The girls mentioned Robert, but said that he probably didn't have anything to do with it since he was out of town. They also told the police about how their mother saw other people when Robert was gone, and one of these men was named Joe. They said that they had actually heard Nikki and Joe arguing on the phone the day before. While most of the detectives needed to go to work on the investigation, they asked the girls what they could do to make them feel better, and the girls' answers raised some red flags. They asked if they could watch an episode of CSI. Now, don't get me wrong, I think for many of us in the true crime community, crime shows are what we watch to relax, as sick and twisted as that might be, but still, right after finding your mom brutally murdered, it is a bit weird. So back at the house, the investigators quickly realized that the murder didn't appear to be a result of a burglary. There were no broken windows, no damage to any doors, and it seemed like whoever had done this had either been let in or lived there. Besides the overwhelming smell of blood, they could also smell bleach, and they could see that someone had at least attempted and failed to clean up some of the blood. Other detectives questioned the neighbors, and that one neighbor next door told them about that doorbell ringing in the morning. In the media, several outlets have said that this neighbor just couldn't be bothered, and I think someone frantically ringing the doorbell was a big deal. However, that actually wasn't the case. The neighbor did get up, but as a responsible pet owner, he needed to put his dog away because by that point the dog was barking and going crazy. When he opened the door, there was nobody there anymore, and he didn't notice what the police saw later, which was blood on the siding of his house near the front door, as if someone had leaned against it. Had he seen that, he most definitely would have called the police. As far as he knew, some person could have been playing ding-dong ditch or soliciting for any reason. And it's my opinion that that neighbor probably beats himself up over not answering the door and possibly helping Nikki, but I do hope that he knows there was absolutely no way he could have predicted what was actually going on. Of course, Robert and the other boyfriend, Joe, were the first to be investigated in this. Strangely, different outlets say that Joe was a real person, but others say that he's made up. And as hard as I tried, I couldn't figure out which is true. However, in the versions where Joe is real, the detectives apparently thought that he and Robert both showed genuine emotion of people who had just lost a loved one, and they both allowed for hand and body checks and DNA swabs, and also agreed to and passed polygraph tests. Robert was states away at the time, making a delivery with his truck, and Joe, who was more or less of a friend of Nikki's with benefits, he had been at work, so as much as they didn't want to, the next obvious persons of interest were the twins, and they were going to have to ask them some questions. At the police station, everyone noticed that Jazz and Taz were still wearing their jackets and gloves inside. And it's cold in Georgia during January, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't cold in the station. And to detectives, this was another red flag. They separated the girls to question each of them alone and asked them to take off their gloves and jackets, which they did. The detectives noticed a deep cut on one of their fingers, which appeared to him to be a knife slip wound. The detective asked where the wounds came from, and the girls told him that they had gotten into a fight with each other.
Let me see your hands and your arms. What happened here?
I got into a fight.
Did you get in a fight with her?
And that's what caused these marks and these wounds. They didn't say so, but the detectives made some notes of every sketchy detail. They took photos of all of the little cuts that they found, as well as the bite marks on Taz's arm. The girls started to get a little nervous that the police might not have believed their initial story. So at one point, it appears that Taz noticed the camera in the corner of the interrogation room, and in an obviously performative act, she could be heard saying, "Stupid scratch, they are going to blame this whole thing on me because of a stupid scratch." And she was saying this to herself while she was alone in the room.
Mom is dead. Stupid scratch. I'm this whole thing on me over this scratch.
She also said things like, "Please God, I really want them to catch this person." Now at that point, even though the detectives had their suspicions, they had to gather much more evidence to know for sure if they were going to be able to detain or charge the girls with anything. Sadly for them, they were separated and sent to stay with other various family members. And during this time, an autopsy of Nikki was conducted, and it was discovered that she had between 50 to 80 stab wounds. The sheer number and depth of these wounds caused her spinal cord to be nearly completely severed, which would have been why she couldn't move once she was placed in the bathtub. Based on the severity and the pattern of the wounds, the medical examiner believed Nikki's death to be a crime of passion. To build a case, the investigators had to return to the home several times, each time collecting more and more evidence. In addition to blood being absolutely everywhere, bloody clothing belonging to the twins were found in the washing machine, and some brown boots were found in a shoebox, and in one of the boots was a large clump of Nikki's hair. Some of Nikki's siblings started to feel suspicious about the girls as well, because it honestly didn't seem like they needed any grieving time at all. They basically just went right back to school, attended prom, parties, and were seeing their boyfriends that they had previously been forbidden from seeing by their mother. At Nikki's funeral, Taz and Jazz brought these boys as their guests, and they were all giggling and messing around, causing some of the family to get very angry for not taking their mother's death seriously. Nikki's brother actually looked at them and said, "What did you do to my sister?" which caused him to be escorted out of the service. After this, they just continued to party, not knowing, or maybe not caring, that the police were actively building a case against them. Before the burial, an impression was taken of Nikki's teeth, and it was compared to the photo of the bite wound on Taz's arm. And lo and behold, it was a match, and just another piece of evidence that pointed to the twins. The detectives also found something may have pointed to Nikki's murder not being some crime of passion or an in-the-moment fight gone bad, because in their room, the investigators found a journal that was shared between the twins. They both wrote entries in the journal, often ranting about their hatred for their mother and how they were going to get rid of her soon. And this journal may have been the proof they needed of premeditation. It took nearly 4 months for the detectives to gather evidence, and during that time, it became pretty obvious to everyone, even Jazz and Taz, that they were being looked at as suspects. They still had more work to do, but the detectives were afraid of the girls possibly fleeing, so they used what they had to get a warrant for their arrest and to charge them with the felony murder of their mother and aggravated assault. They were arrested on May 21st, 2010, and in the police car, they were unaware that a microphone was on. Jazz could be heard saying, "They're talking about the bite mark." Then Taz saying, "The day that you find a murder weapon with my fingerprints on it or something, please do that. Please find a murder weapon and then it will be different for real."
Rolling down for something I did not do. Me either. The day you find a murder with my fingerprints on it or something, please do that. Please find a murder weapon and then get rid of her. Thank you.
Which is kind of a weird thing to say. It's almost like she's admitting that there may be a murder weapon with her fingerprints on it, but good luck finding it. Plus, at that point, I really don't think the state even needed a murder weapon to charge them based on the huge mountain of circumstantial evidence and DNA evidence that they had. Especially because later, one more piece of evidence basically solidified to everyone that the twins had done this, if it was still somehow unclear. In addition to the bite mark photos matching up with the molds and all of that, the medical examiner also found a couple tiny hairs stuck in Nikki's teeth, basically proving that Nikki had bitten one or both of them during the attack. Now, as we know, Taz and Jazz are identical, even down to their DNA. And interestingly, I actually learned that the only difference in identical twins is their fingerprints. Everything else, blood, hair, all the DNA is the same, but not fingerprints. So with the hair, they could only confidently say that Nikki had bit one of them in self-defense. But based on all of the other evidence, it was clear that they were both involved in this. However, regardless of all of the evidence, both of the girls initially pled not guilty.
No, I swear to God.
Even though Jazz and Taz had told detectives that they were a little late to school and had walked all the way there after missing the bus, they were presented with CCTV footage of themselves arriving at the gas station around 10:30 a.m., getting in a car, and then footage of them exiting that car in their school parking lot a few minutes later. That left about 2 to 3 hours unaccounted for, and the girls even said themselves that the school wasn't very far. So obviously, they weren't walking that entire time. The girls who had once seemed so sweet, innocent, and polite were now cold and had major attitudes and were being extremely uncooperative. We all know that the wheels of justice turn slow, sometimes extremely slow, and Jazz and Taz were still waiting for almost 4 years for a trial to begin. I mean, obviously, everyone on their defense team would need a lot of time to try to sift through the mountains of discovery, evidence, and to come up with a nearly impossible defense strategy. However, part of me wonders if the trial was prolonged so that the girls could kind of get a taste of what prison was like and would be more receptive to taking a deal. Now, I don't know if that's the case, but to me, it just seems like 4 years is a long time to even present a deal for them. The twins were facing life in prison after being indicted as co-defendants by a grand jury, and it was expected that they would be tried together. However, the county district attorney filed a motion to sever the trials, which was ultimately granted. Their trials weren't the only thing that was separated. Even though they were being tried as adults, Jazz and Taz were only 16 years old, and they were placed in separate juvenile detention facilities until they turned 17. Without each other for the first time ever, they had several years to think about their own decision, and before any trials were set to begin, Taz decided to take a deal. She would plead guilty to voluntary manslaughter, falsification in government matters, and possession of a knife during the commission of a crime in exchange for a lesser sentence. She was offered a 30-year sentence, but only if she told the entire truth of what took place the night of the murder. Jazz was still adamant about going to trial to prove her innocence, but a defense attorney probably explained that this deal was her only chance at ever living outside of prison in the future. So not long after Taz took this deal, Jazz took the deal as well. The twins gave 2 taped confessions, which basically matched up enough to each other and to corroborating evidence for the court to finalize the deal.
She just started waving the pot around and things like that or whatever. And so I guess she trying to hit us with the pot. You know, she just threatening us and everything.
The girls say they got the pot away from her, but it was the start of an all-out brawl.
Your mom's yelling?
We all yelling.
Everybody's yelling.
We mad.
I had took the pot from her. This one she had grabbed, like kind of turned like you said, get back. But she didn't keep the knife in her hand.
My mom is winning that battle with the knife or whatever, so I picked up the pot and I hit her with the pot.
Jazz breaks this red vase over her mother's head. It was the first sign of blood, and her mother fought back.
She bit me in my chest. Like I said, I'm not that big, so when she bit me, she latched on to me, and I'm trying to get her off of me because it hurts. I'm trying to punch her, I guess, and I think Taz stabbed her. Just stay up there.
After more fighting, Jazz says at some point she begins to choke her mother with this ribboned medallion she won as a child. Her mother delivers a swift backhand blow, catching her by surprise.
So I was stunned. I think I picked up a knife and I stabbed her. They wasn't cuts like they were deep because I couldn't bring myself to do that.
After all the biting, punching, screaming, and stabbing, the twins drag their mother into the bathtub. Neither really explain why.
You had her by the hands?
Yeah, I think I was at the top.
And Jazz had her feet.
Yeah, she was heavy.
What did y'all do?
They put her in the tub.
But Nikki Whitehead was still alive. In fact, she was talking to the twins.
What's she saying?
She hated us. She hated us. And I don't know why it's like the same thing. We're going to jail.
But what are you saying to her?
I'm sorry. I told her I was sorry.
Minutes later, they would watch their mother die.
She went under a couple times and that was it.
When that was it, let me use your words, when that was it, what'd you and your sister do?
I guess we were shocked. We were really relieved. I guess what we did. We cried. For a long time.
I don't think there will ever be a way of knowing the truth about every single detail and who did what, who was the primary aggressor, etc. But the identical twins received identical sentences. 30 years with the possibility of parole. They were eligible for parole in 2017, but as of 2023, they are both still in prison with a tentative parole date of May 2025. If their parole is not granted, they will be released at the age of 46. So what do you think about this case? Because there are some people who truly believe that Jazz and Taz are just plain evil and killed their mom for no other reason than that they didn't want to go to school and they wanted to date these boys. And others think that Nikki was way too hard on the girls after not being their parent for the first half of their lives, and that it was unrealistic to think that they would just accept her as an authority figure when she had never been one in the past. They also saw her as very hypocritical due to her past behavior, and even some of the behaviors she had during that time, like the smoking. Then there are some who think that these were two girls who had severe abandonment issues, had learned to only depend on each other, and had developed an us versus the world mentality, and who had deep-seated resentment toward their mother. Now, in my opinion, I think it's possibly a mixture of the latter two. I don't think that two beautiful, happy, smart, and sweet girls were just born evil. Maybe they just had so much anger that they didn't even know what to do with it, and when they realized that causing a scene and even assaulting their mom would get them what they wanted, I think that maybe they fell back on that when they felt trapped. Do you think that the girls told the truth in their confessions? Because the only parts I'm a little skeptical about are if Nikki actually waved that kitchen pot around, or if the girls just decided to jump her for waking them up for school. I also don't know if I buy that Nikki told them that she hated them as she was quote unquote going under the water, as they had said. She would have been justified in saying that, don't get me wrong, but I don't think that she would have actually meant it if she did. She was probably just disappointed, heartbroken, and terrified. But I still think that even after all of the hurt they caused each other and after being physically attacked by her own daughters, she still loved them. She still would have done anything to make it work.
I really wished it didn't happen like that. I wish I could have saw something else to do. I wish I did. Sorry. It was just confusion. It was like turmoil. It's just when I get nervous, dog.
I'm sorry, miss her. But it was not what Linda and all of them try to make it seem. I didn't hate her. I didn't hate her either. It just was built up. I don't know, I guess heat of the moment and just built up anger between all three of us.
Nikki's mother, Linda, has spoken out and said that she thinks that the state failed her daughter and her granddaughters because of the constant flip-flopping between houses was unhealthy, confusing, and possibly even traumatic for the girls. Saying one day mom's there, one day she's not, and then all of a sudden she's back telling them what to do. Linda said there needed to be some sort of guided, slow transition from one home to another because just sticking all three of them together with no support was bound to end in disaster. While in prison, both girls have graduated high school, and Taz was even the valedictorian of her class. Della was there and continues to be there to support her great-granddaughters, who are currently still in separate prisons. I know that some people out there do think it's cruel to separate the twins, especially identical twins, but I think the court could see how important it was for them to develop some sort of personal identity and sense of self besides just being twins. There was clearly some generational dysfunction in this family and a lot of maternal resentment that needed extensive therapy to be dealt with. Unfortunately, Nikki didn't get that chance, and now the girls have to live with a decision that they made at 16 years old forever. But maybe while they are apart, they will grow as individuals, learn to think for themselves, and get the help they need before returning to society for a second chance. Based on the love Nikki had for her daughters, I'm sure it's a chance that she would also want them to have. But what do you think? All right, guys, thanks for tuning in with me on this case today. I know it was a bit on the longer side. I want to know your questions about the motive and if you truly think they're just evil, but I'm also really curious what you think about them being up for parole, first of all, in just a couple years ago, but now in March of 2025. That seems really early to me, but I guess not. I don't know. What do you think? Anyways, thanks so much for tuning in today, guys. Don't forget, hit that subscribe button really quick. It's totally free. And follow me on Instagram for more behind the scenes. It's @_Annie Elise. All right, guys, until the next one. Stay safe. Bye.